I stared down the barrel of my father's hunting rifle, Madison's trembling hands gripping the wooden stock like her life depended on it. Papers scattered across our dining room table, property transfer documents, bearing forged signatures that would steal everything our family had built. Dad sat motionless in his wheelchair stroke, having stolen his voice, but not his understanding, his eyes pleading with me to stay strong. Madison's voice cracked as she screamed about deadlines and consequences, sweat beading on her forehead. I reached calmly into my jacket pocket, pulled out my phone, smiled, and said, "Look at this." Her face drained completely of color as she saw the screen. 10 seconds passed in dead silence. Then came the loud bang as FBI agents burst through our front door. 3 months earlier, I had driven my beat-up Honda Civic down Interstate 35 from Chicago, watching the Austin skyline grow larger through my windshield as I approached the place I'd called home for 23 years. My MBA program at Northwestern had been everything I'd dreamed of, but family emergencies don't wait for convenient timing. Torres Family Restaurant sat on South First Street like a beacon of hope in our neighborhood, its hand-painted sign weathered but proud after 25 years of serving authentic Mexican-American cuisine to locals and tourists alike. Dad had started this business with nothing but a borrowed $10,000 in recipes passed down from my grandmother in Guadalajara. Frank Torres possessed the kind of work ethic that built American dreams one plate at a time. He'd wake up at 4 every morning to prep fresh salsa marinate carnitas and roll hundreds of tortillas by hand. Madison and I grew up folding napkins after school, learning the value of honest labor and community respect. When I left for graduate school 2 years ago, Madison had seemed perfectly capable of handling the marketing and financial responsibilities. She'd always been better with numbers than I was, graduating summa cum laude from UT with her accounting degree. Dad trusted her completely, especially after her divorce, when she moved back home and threw herself into the business operations. The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday night while I was studying for my strategic management final. Madison's voice sounded strained as she explained that Dad had suffered a massive stroke while closing the restaurant. The doctors at Del Seaton Medical Center weren't sure he'd ever walk normally again, and his speech had been severely affected. "Yolanda, I need you to come home," she said, and I heard something in her tone that made my stomach drop. I found Dad in the rehabilitation wing, working with physical therapists to regain basic motor functions. His left side remained partially paralyzed, and forming complete sentences required tremendous effort. But his mind stayed sharp, and when he saw me enter his room, tears filled his eyes. "Mija." He whispered the word, barely audible, but filled with relief. Madison looked exhausted, her usually perfect makeup smudged, and her business attire wrinkled from days spent at the hospital. She'd been managing both the restaurant operations and Dad's medical care, coordinating with insurance companies, and keeping our dozen employees paid. The responsibility seemed overwhelming for one person, and I felt guilty for being absent during such a critical time. The restaurant showed signs of Madison's stress. Customer service remained excellent, but I noticed small details that would have bothered Dad. Inventory levels seemed inconsistent, vendor deliveries arrived at odd times, and some of our longtime suppliers had switched to cash-only arrangements. Madison explained these changes as necessary adaptations to manage cash flow during Dad's hospitalization. Our family's pride centered around this business that represented everything America offered to those willing to work for their dreams. Dad had started as a dishwasher at another restaurant, learning English from customers and saving every penny until he could afford his own location. The Torres Family Restaurant became a gathering place for our community, hosting quinceañera celebrations, neighborhood meetings, and fundraisers for local charities. I'd always planned to return after completing my MBA, bringing fresh marketing strategies and modern business practices to help expand our success. Dad and I had discussed opening a second location, perhaps near the university campus, where college students would appreciate authentic food at reasonable prices. Those dreams seemed distant now as I watched him struggle to lift a spoon to his mouth during lunch. Madison assured me she had everything under control financially, showing me spreadsheets that demonstrated steady revenue and manageable expenses. The numbers looked reasonable, though I noticed some vendor payments seemed higher than I remembered. When I asked about specific discrepancies, she became defensive and reminded me that I'd been absent for 2 years while she handled all operational responsibilities. Trust had always defined our family relationships. Dad had never questioned our decisions or demanded detailed reports about our activities. Madison and I had shared clothes, secrets, and dreams throughout our childhood, never imagining circumstances that might create conflict between us. The idea that my sister could deceive me about anything important seemed impossible. But as I spent more time reviewing restaurant operations, small inconsistencies began accumulating into larger concerns. Cash register totals didn't always match credit card receipts. Employee schedules showed overtime hours that seemed excessive, and our regular customers mentioned price increases I didn't remember authorizing. Madison dismissed these observations as natural business fluctuations during a transitional period. Then I discovered the missing money. While organizing financial documents for Dad's insurance claims, I found bank statements showing substantial cash withdrawals that weren't reflected in our expense reports. $47,000 had disappeared from our main operating account over the past 6 months, with no corresponding vendor payments or equipment purchases to justify the transactions. When I confronted Madison about these withdrawals, her explanation sounded rehearsed and vague. She mentioned emergency repairs to kitchen equipment, advance payments to secure better wholesale prices, and temporary loans to struggling vendors who needed financial assistance. None of these explanations included receipts or documentation, and Madison became increasingly agitated when I pressed for specific details. The restaurant office occupied a cramped space behind the kitchen filled with filing cabinets, desk equipment, and 25 years of business records. Dad had always maintained meticulous documentation, keeping every receipt, invoice, and contract organized by date and category. His attention to detail had saved us from numerous accounting problems over the years, and I knew any missing documentation represented serious irregularities. Madison typically handled the dinner rush while I managed lunch service, giving me access to the office during evening hours when she couldn't observe my activities. The financial records told a disturbing story once I began examining them systematically. Cash withdrawals had started small 18 months ago, just a few $100s here and there. But the amounts had grown progressively larger, reaching several $1,000s per withdrawal in recent months. Vendor invoices showed another pattern of deception. Madison had created fake billing documents from companies that didn't exist using these fabricated expenses to justify cash withdrawals from business accounts. Some legitimate vendor relationships had been terminated, abruptly replaced with less reliable suppliers who charged significantly higher prices but offered flexible payment arrangements that always involved cash transactions. Jake Martinez had managed our bookkeeping responsibilities for 15 years before Madison convinced Dad to handle finances internally as a cost-saving measure. Jake lived 3 blocks from the restaurant and had watched our business grow from a small family operation into a neighborhood institution. He understood our seasonal fluctuations, knew which vendors offered the best prices, and had helped Dad navigate complex tax regulations with expertise and integrity. I found Jake at his home workshop restoring a 1967 Mustang convertible that had belonged to his grandfather. Tools covered every surface of his garage, and classic rock music played softly from a paint-splattered radio. He looked surprised to see me, but welcomed me inside with the warmth I remembered from childhood visits. "Yolanda, I was wondering when you'd come talk to me," Jake said, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop towel. "I've been worried about your father since the stroke. How's his recovery progressing? When I asked about his concerns regarding restaurant finances, Jake's expression became serious. He'd noticed discrepancies in cash flow patterns during the months before Madison assumed full control of bookkeeping responsibilities. Vendor payments seemed irregular, employee payroll occasionally ran late, and cash register receipts didn't always match daily sales reports. When Jake raised these issues with Madison, she'd dismissed his concerns as micromanagement and convinced Dad that external bookkeeping services were unnecessary expenses. "I didn't want to cause family problems," Jake explained, adjusting his baseball cap nervously. "Madison said you'd be coming back soon to help with business operations, and she promised to clean up any accounting irregularities before your return. But some of those discrepancies were pretty significant, and I was never comfortable leaving them unresolved." Jake helped me understand which financial patterns indicated systematic theft, rather than simple accounting errors. The timing of cash withdrawals corresponded with periods when Dad was least likely to review bank statements, typically during busy weekend rushes or holiday preparations. Madison had also changed the mailing address for bank statements to a post office box she controlled, preventing Dad from seeing monthly summaries of account activity. Security camera footage revealed additional evidence of Madison's deceptive behavior. Our surveillance system recorded all activities in the office area, including late-night visits when Madison removed documents from the fireproof safe, where Dad kept important contracts and legal papers. These recordings showed Madison photographing documents with her phone, presumably to create copies for fraudulent purposes. The safe contained our business license, property deeds, insurance policies, and loan agreements for restaurant equipment. Madison had access to the combination because Dad trusted family members completely, never imagining circumstances that would require restricting access to important documents. But the security footage showed her examining papers that weren't related to daily business operations, particularly documents related to property ownership and business valuation. I spent hours reviewing 3 years of financial records using spreadsheet software to track cash flows and identify patterns of theft. The evidence painted a clear picture of systematic embezzlement that had accelerated dramatically over the past 18 months. Madison had stolen money through fake vendor invoices, unauthorized cash withdrawals, manipulated payroll records, and inflated expense reports. Customer service hadn't declined, because Madison understood that maintaining restaurant operations was essential to continued theft opportunities. But behind the scenes, she'd been systematically draining resources that Dad and our employees had worked decades to accumulate. The total amount stolen approached levels that threatened the long-term viability of our entire business. Even more disturbing, I discovered forged signatures on bank documents that Madison had used to increase withdrawal limits and establish new lines of credit. Dad's signature on these documents looked authentic, but the dates corresponded to periods when his stroke symptoms would have made signing his name nearly impossible. Madison had practiced forging Dad's handwriting extensively, creating documents that authorized financial transactions he'd never approved. The evidence was overwhelming, but I couldn't understand Madison's motivation for stealing from our family business. She earned a reasonable salary, lived rent-free in Dad's house, and had access to company credit cards for legitimate business expenses. Why would she risk destroying everything our family had built for money she could have earned through honest work and patience? Then I realized the theft had begun long before Dad's stroke, starting gradually, while Madison seemed to be functioning normally in her personal and professional life. Something had been driving her to steal money systematically, and whatever that motivation was, it had become increasingly desperate as the amount stolen grew larger. The final piece of evidence I discovered that evening changed my understanding of the situation completely. Madison hadn't just stolen money from restaurant operations. She'd been secretly borrowing against our property values, using forged documents to secure loans that put our entire family legacy at risk. The restaurant building and Dad's house had been used as collateral for debts that could result in foreclosure if payments weren't maintained. Following Madison had never been part of my original plan, but Understanding her motivation required observing her activities outside the restaurant. She'd started leaving work early several nights each week, claiming exhaustion from managing both business operations and Dad's medical appointments. Her explanations sounded reasonable, but I'd noticed her mood swings seemed unrelated to work stress or family responsibilities. On Thursday evening, Madison left the restaurant at 8 o'clock, saying she needed groceries and would go to bed early. I waited 30 minutes before following her Honda Accord north on Interstate 35 toward Round Rock. She drove past several grocery stores without stopping, eventually turning into the parking lot of Lucky Star Casino, a massive gaming complex that attracted players from across Central Texas. The casino interior assaulted visitors with flashing lights, electronic sounds, and the constant hum of slot machines. Cigarette smoke hung thick in the air despite ventilation systems, and the atmosphere felt deliberately designed to disorient and excite gamblers. I kept my distance as Madison walked confidently past rows of slot machines toward the high-stakes poker area near the back of the building. She greeted several other players by name, obviously a regular participant in these games. The minimum buy-in for her table was $500, and I watched her purchase chips worth $3,000 using cash from a thick envelope in her purse. Her demeanor changed completely once she sat down at the poker table, becoming animated and aggressive in ways I'd never seen at the restaurant or during family interactions. Over the next 4 hours, Madison lost every chip she'd purchased and bought additional chips twice more. The total amount she gambled that evening exceeded $8,000, money that clearly came from restaurant accounts based on the cash payments she used. Other players seemed familiar with her betting patterns, and I overheard conversations suggesting she'd been losing consistently for months. I left before Madison finished playing, driving home with questions spinning through my mind. Gambling addiction would explain the systematic theft, the increasing desperation, and the elaborate efforts to conceal her activities from Dad and me. But the amounts she'd stolen suggested gambling losses far beyond what I'd witnessed in one evening, indicating a problem that had been growing worse for years. The next morning, I contacted a private investigator who specialized in financial background checks. Within 48 hours, she provided documentation of Madison's gambling activities that painted a devastating picture of addiction and debt. Credit reports showed Madison owed money to 7 different casinos across Texas and Oklahoma, with total debts exceeding $160,000. Loan shark connections emerged from further investigation. Several of Madison's creditors weren't legitimate businesses, but individuals who charged excessive interest rates and used intimidation tactics to collect payments. Phone records showed numerous calls between Madison and numbers associated with illegal lending operations, suggesting she'd borrowed money from dangerous sources when traditional credit options were exhausted. The timeline of Madison's gambling addiction corresponded perfectly with the escalation of theft from restaurant accounts. Her initial losses had been modest, funded through personal savings and credit cards. But as her debts grew larger, she'd begun stealing small amounts from daily cash receipts. When those thefts weren't sufficient to cover mounting losses and loan payments, Madison had escalated to more sophisticated schemes involving fake invoices and forged documents. Her marriage had ended 2 years ago, around the time her gambling activities became most destructive. Court documents from her divorce revealed that her ex-husband had discovered significant gambling debts and hidden financial obligations that Madison had concealed throughout their relationship. He'd filed for divorce specifically citing financial deception and refused to accept responsibility for debts he hadn't authorized. Madison's return to live with Dad wasn't motivated by family loyalty or concern for the restaurant business. She'd needed a place to live after losing her house in the divorce settlement, and proximity to restaurant operations provided better opportunities for continued theft. Dad's trust and limited oversight of daily financial activities made the restaurant an ideal target for systematic embezzlement. Phone messages on Madison's cell phone revealed the desperation of her situation. Creditors were demanding immediate payment of overdue balances, threatening legal action and physical consequences if debts weren't satisfied promptly. Some messages specifically mentioned the restaurant and Dad's house as assets that could be seized to recover outstanding loans, suggesting Madison's creditors had researched our family's financial resources extensively. The private investigator also discovered that Madison had been meeting with real estate agents to discuss selling family properties. She'd claimed to represent Dad's interests as power of attorney, using medical documentation of his stroke to justify her authority to make financial decisions. Several agents had provided market valuations for both the restaurant building and Dad's house, with Madison requesting expedited sale processes that would generate cash within 30 days. Legal documents revealed the most shocking discovery of my investigation. Madison had forged power of attorney papers authorizing herself to make all financial decisions on Dad's behalf, using his medical condition to justify this authority. These documents would allow her to sell our properties, liquidate business assets, and access retirement accounts without obtaining Dad's actual consent. The forgery was sophisticated, incorporating official seals and notarized signatures that would fool most buyers and financial institutions. Madison had researched the legal requirements extensively, creating documents that met technical standards while completely misrepresenting Dad's actual wishes and mental capacity. His stroke had affected his speech and motor functions, but hadn't impaired his cognitive abilities or decision-making capacity. I realized Madison's plan involved selling everything our family owned to pay gambling debts and loan shark obligations, then disappearing with any remaining proceeds. The property sales were scheduled for the following week, with Madison planning to complete all transactions before Dad or I could discover her intentions. Once the sales were finalized, our family would lose everything we'd worked decades to build, and Madison would vanish to avoid consequences for her theft and fraud. The restaurant kitchen stayed open until midnight on Fridays, allowing us to serve late diners and weekend customers who appreciated authentic Mexican food after bars and entertainment venues closed. Madison typically handled the cash register during these busy periods, giving her access to substantial amounts of money that could be diverted to fund gambling activities. I waited until all customers had left and our last employee had finished cleaning before approaching her about what I'd discovered. Madison was counting the evening's receipts when I entered the kitchen, sorting bills and credit card slips into neat piles for deposit preparation. She looked tired but satisfied, with the night's business volume humming softly while organizing money that represented hours of hard work by our kitchen staff and servers. The contrast between her cheerful demeanor and the devastating fraud I'd uncovered made the conversation ahead feel surreal. "We need to talk about the missing money," I said, closing the kitchen door behind me to ensure privacy for what would undoubtedly become an emotional discussion. Madison's hands froze mid-count, and her expression shifted from relaxed contentment to defensive alertness in a matter of seconds. Initially, Madison denied any knowledge of financial irregularities, suggesting that accounting discrepancies resulted from my unfamiliarity with current business operations. She reminded me that I'd been absent for 2 years, while she'd handled all restaurant responsibilities, implying that my concerns reflected inexperience rather than legitimate problems with her management. Her tone remained calm and reasonable, but I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she continued organizing money. When I presented specific evidence of forged vendor invoices and unauthorized cash withdrawals, Madison's denials became more elaborate and desperate. She claimed the fake invoices represented legitimate payments to contractors who preferred informal arrangements, and the cash withdrawals were emergency funds needed for equipment repairs that couldn't wait for check processing. Each explanation contained enough partial truth to sound plausible, while avoiding the core issue of systematic theft. Madison became increasingly agitated as I continued presenting evidence, eventually abandoning her attempts to provide rational explanations. Instead, she shifted to emotional manipulation, reminding me of sacrifices she'd made while I pursued my education in Chicago. She'd given up her own career opportunities to help Dad manage the business, worked countless overtime hours without additional compensation, and postponed personal goals to ensure restaurant operations continued smoothly. "You have no idea what I've been through these past 2 years," Madison said, tears filling her eyes as she described the loneliness and pressure of managing business operations without support. "While you were living your dream in graduate school, I was here dealing with Dad's health problems, difficult employees, and financial pressures you can't imagine. I sacrificed everything for this family, and now you're accusing me of being a criminal." Her emotional appeal was designed to make me feel guilty for pursuing my education and leaving family responsibilities to her. Madison had always been skilled at manipulating conversations to avoid accountability, and this situation brought out her most sophisticated psychological tactics. She portrayed herself as a victim of circumstances rather than the perpetrator of systematic fraud, deflecting blame while generating sympathy for her supposed sacrifices. When emotional manipulation failed to derail my questioning, Madison resorted to threats and intimidation. She warned me that revealing financial discrepancies could destroy the restaurant's reputation, hurt our employees, who depended on steady income, and potentially trigger another stroke in Dad if he learned about our family conflicts. The responsibility for protecting everyone's welfare, according to Madison, required me to remain silent about what I'd discovered. Madison also threatened to reveal embarrassing information about my time in graduate school, claiming she'd learned about academic struggles and personal relationships that I wouldn't want Dad to know about. These threats were completely fabricated, but they demonstrated her willingness to use any available weapon to protect herself from consequences of her fraud and theft. The most manipulative aspect of Madison's response was her promise to fix everything if I agreed to keep her activities secret. She claimed to have a plan for repaying the stolen money through legitimate business activities, insisting that exposure would prevent her from making restitution and ultimately harm the family more than helping us. This promise was designed to appeal to my desire to protect Dad and preserve our family relationships, while giving Madison additional time to complete her escape plans. I realized during this conversation that Madison's gambling addiction had destroyed her ability to think rationally about consequences and alternatives. She genuinely believed she could continue stealing money to pay gambling debts, while simultaneously repaying previous thefts and maintaining normal family relationships. The cognitive distortions typical of severe addiction had convinced her that increasingly elaborate deceptions represented viable solutions to her problems. Madison's final revelation that evening destroyed any remaining sympathy I felt for her situation. She admitted to having already found buyers for both the restaurant building and Dad's house, with closing dates scheduled for the following week. The power of attorney documents she'd forged would allow her to complete these sales without Dad's knowledge or consent, and she planned to use the proceeds to pay her most dangerous creditors before disappearing to another state. I never wanted things to go this far. Madison said, her tears now genuine as she realized I wouldn't be manipulated into silence. But I don't have any choice. These people will hurt Dad if I don't pay them, and the only way to get that kind of money is to sell the properties. At least this way he'll be safe even if he loses everything. This rationalization revealed how completely addiction had distorted Madison's thinking. She'd convinced herself that stealing our family legacy represented protection, rather than betrayal, that Dad would be safer homeless than in danger from her creditors. The psychological defense mechanisms that allowed her to continue gambling while stealing from family had created a fantasy world where her destructive actions were actually heroic sacrifices. I left that conversation knowing that Madison was beyond reasoning and represented an immediate threat to everything our family had worked to build. Her gambling addiction, combined with dangerous debts and increasingly desperate thinking, made her capable of destroying our lives to save herself. The property sales were scheduled to begin Monday morning, giving me only 3 days to prevent the complete destruction of our family's financial security. My apartment near the University of Texas campus became command headquarters for building a case against Madison's fraud activities. Law enforcement would require substantial documentation to pursue criminal charges, and I needed irrefutable proof that would prevent Madison from manipulating the situation through lies and emotional appeals. The dining room table disappeared under stacks of financial records, photographs, computer printouts, and legal documents that told the story of systematic theft and deception. Digital photography allowed me to document every piece of evidence without removing original documents from restaurant files. Bank statements, vendor invoices, cash receipt records, and correspondence files were systematically photographed using high-resolution settings that captured details clearly enough for law enforcement analysis. I organized these images by date and category, creating a comprehensive timeline that demonstrated the progression of Madison's criminal activities. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit occupied offices in downtown Austin, housed in a modern building that projected federal authority and competence. Detective Sarah Torres greeted me in a conference room filled with case files and computer equipment, listening carefully as I explained the evidence I'd gathered regarding Madison's embezzlement activities. Her questions were precise and professional, focusing on documentation that would support criminal prosecution rather than family reconciliation. Detective Torres explained that financial crimes involving forged documents and interstate gambling activities fell under federal jurisdiction, giving the FBI authority to investigate and prosecute Madison's activities. The amounts stolen exceeded thresholds that triggered mandatory criminal referrals, and the sophisticated nature of document forgery indicated premeditation that would support serious felony charges. Federal prosecution would also provide protection from local intimidation tactics that loan sharks might attempt to influence local courts. Recording equipment provided by the FBI allowed me to document Madison's admissions during subsequent conversations about her gambling activities and theft. The wire device was sophisticated enough to capture clear audio while remaining undetectable during normal interactions, and Detective Torres coached me on conversation techniques that would encourage Madison to provide incriminating statements without appearing to interrogate her. The recordings revealed additional criminal activities that I hadn't discovered through document analysis alone. Madison had been using restaurant facilities to launder money for some of her gambling creditors, processing fictional catering orders that allowed illegal funds to appear as legitimate business income. This money laundering activity involved Madison in criminal conspiracies that extended far beyond simple embezzlement, potentially exposing her to federal charges that carried sentences of 10 to 20 years in prison. Legal preparation required consultation with attorneys who specialized in asset protection and family business preservation. The lawyers reviewed power of attorney documents that Madison had forged, confirming that these papers would be sufficient to authorize property sales if buyers and title companies didn't conduct thorough verification of Dad's actual consent. Preventing these fraudulent sales required immediate legal action that would freeze all property transactions until criminal investigations were completed. Emergency restraining orders provided temporary protection for family assets, while law enforcement built criminal cases against Madison. These orders prevented any property sales or major financial transactions without court approval, effectively blocking Madison's escape plans while giving prosecutors time to gather additional evidence. The orders also required Madison to surrender all business credit cards and bank account access, limiting her ability to steal additional money during the investigation period. Setting the trap for Madison's final attempt to complete fraudulent transactions required careful coordination between law enforcement attorneys and real estate professionals. Detective Torres arranged for undercover agents to pose as prospective buyers interested in purchasing restaurant property, providing opportunities to record Madison's attempts to forge Dad's consent for the sale. These recordings would demonstrate criminal intent and provide evidence of ongoing fraud activities rather than past mistakes she might claim to regret. Madison's paranoid behavior increased dramatically as legal pressure mounted around her activities. She began checking restaurant offices for surveillance equipment, asked suspicious questions about my activities outside work hours, and made numerous phone calls to unknown contacts during which she spoke in guarded language about finishing business and taking care of problems. Her growing awareness that her criminal activities had been discovered made her increasingly desperate and potentially dangerous. The discovery of Dad's hunting rifle missing from his bedroom closet transformed the situation from financial fraud investigation into potential violent confrontation. Madison had always known where Dad kept his firearms, and her access to weapons combined with mounting desperation created serious safety concerns for everyone involved in exposing her criminal activities. Detective Torres immediately arranged for protective surveillance and began planning tactical response options. Phone monitoring revealed that Madison's most dangerous creditors were demanding immediate payment of outstanding debts, threatening physical harm to her family members if money wasn't delivered by the weekend. These threats explained Madison's escalating desperation and willingness to risk violent confrontation rather than accepting consequences for her gambling addiction and theft. The loan sharks weren't interested in her promises or payment plans. They wanted cash immediately, or they would begin hurting people she cared about. Madison's decision to force a family meeting represented her final attempt to complete property transfers before law enforcement could stop her. She believed that threatening Dad and me with violence would compel our cooperation in signing documents that would authorize emergency property sales. Her addiction-distorted thinking convinced her that survival justified any actions necessary to obtain the money her creditors demanded. The FBI tactical team positioned around our house included agents with specialized training in domestic crisis situations and firearms incidents. Detective Torres coordinated communication between surveillance teams, ensuring that law enforcement could respond immediately when Madison made her final desperate move. Recording equipment captured every word of what would become Madison's last free conversation with our family. I understood that confronting Madison while she held a loaded weapon represented enormous personal risk, but allowing her to complete fraudulent property sales would destroy our family's financial security permanently. The evidence I'd gathered and the legal protections we'd established would only be effective if we prevented Madison from carrying out her immediate plans. Everything our family had worked decades to build depended on my ability to remain calm during the most frightening conversation of my life. The dining room where Madison chose to make her final stand held decades of family memories from birthday celebrations to holiday gatherings that had shaped our lives with warmth and love. Pictures of 3 generations covered the walls, showing graduations, weddings, restaurant openings, and proud moments that represented everything our American dream had accomplished. Now, this sacred space became the setting for a confrontation that would determine whether those achievements would survive or be destroyed by addiction and desperation. Dad's wheelchair positioned him near the window where afternoon sunlight illuminated his face, highlighting the determination that had carried him from immigrant dishwasher to successful business owner despite his recent health struggles. His stroke had affected his ability to speak clearly, but his eyes remained sharp and understanding, tracking every movement as Madison paced nervously around the table, where property transfer documents lay scattered like instruments of family destruction. Madison's appearance shocked me with its dramatic deterioration since our kitchen confrontation 3 days earlier. Her usually perfect hair hung limp and unwashed. Her business attire was wrinkled and stained, and dark circles under her eyes indicated sleepless nights spent planning this desperate attempt to steal our family's legacy. The hunting rifle trembled in her hands, revealing the internal struggle between her love for our family and the overwhelming compulsion to satisfy her gambling addiction at any cost. "Sign the papers. Yolanda," Madison demanded, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fear as she gestured toward documents that would transfer ownership of restaurant property to buyers she'd arranged. I don't have time to explain everything, but people are coming tonight who will hurt Dad if I don't give them money. This is the only way to keep everyone safe. Dad's eyes moved between Madison and me, his face expressing heartbreak and disbelief that one of his daughters was threatening the other with a weapon in their childhood home. His mouth moved silently as he struggled to find words that would penetrate Madison's addiction-driven desperation. But the stroke had stolen his ability to speak with the authority and wisdom that had guided our family through previous crises. The property transfer documents contained forged signatures and fabricated authorizations that would allow Madison to sell our restaurant building for significantly less than market value, providing quick cash to satisfy her most dangerous creditors, while destroying the financial foundation of our family business. Additional papers would transfer Dad's house to another buyer, leaving him homeless and dependent, while Madison disappeared with whatever money remained after paying gambling debts. You don't understand the situation. Madison continued, sweat beading on her forehead as she maintained her grip on the rifle while watching for signs that I might resist her demands. These aren't people you can negotiate with or ask for more time. They want their money tonight, or they'll start hurting family members to send a message. I never wanted things to go this far, but I don't have any choice left. I remained seated calmly in my chair, understanding that sudden movements or emotional reactions could trigger Madison's finger on the rifle trigger and end this confrontation tragically. The FBI agents positioned outside our house were monitoring the situation through listening devices, waiting for my signal that would bring tactical teams through our doors to end this crisis. Everything depended on my ability to maintain composure, while Madison's addiction-driven desperation pushed her toward violence. Madison, put the gun down and let's talk about other options, I said softly, keeping my voice steady and reasonable, while reaching slowly into my jacket pocket where my phone waited with evidence that would end her criminal activities permanently. There has to be another way to solve this problem without destroying everything Dad built for our family. Madison's response revealed how completely gambling addiction had distorted her thinking about consequences and alternatives. She insisted that property sales represented the only realistic solution to her debts, that law enforcement couldn't protect our family from loan shark retaliation, and that my resistance to signing transfer documents proved I didn't understand the seriousness of threats against Dad's safety. Her rationalization system had convinced her that stealing our family legacy represented heroic sacrifice, rather than destructive betrayal. The moment of truth arrived when I pulled my phone from my pocket and showed Madison the screen displaying a text message thread with Detective Torres. Real-time updates from FBI surveillance teams surrounded our house, tactical agents positioned at every entrance and arrest warrants ready for execution the moment Madison committed additional felony crimes by threatening family members with weapons. Madison's face drained of all color as she read messages that revealed the complete exposure of her criminal activities. 3 months of careful investigation had documented every aspect of her gambling addiction, systematic theft, document forgery, and money laundering activities. Federal prosecutors had sufficient evidence to pursue charges that would result in decades of prison time, and her threats against family members with weapons would add additional years to any sentence. You recorded our conversations, Madison whispered, her hands shaking more violently as she realized the trap that had been carefully constructed around her criminal activities. You've been working with police this whole time, pretending to care about family while building a case against your own sister. The hunting rifle wavered in Madison's grip as shock and recognition of her complete exposure overwhelmed her ability to maintain threatening posture. Her addiction-driven fantasy of escaping consequences through violence and property theft collapsed as she understood that law enforcement had been anticipating her every move for weeks. The elaborate plans she'd constructed to pay gambling debts and disappear were revealed as delusions that would only result in additional criminal charges. 10 seconds of absolute silence followed as Madison processed the reality that her criminal activities had been discovered, documented, and reported to federal authorities. Her plans to force property sales through threats and violence had failed completely, leaving her facing decades in prison for gambling debts that had destroyed her ability to think rationally about consequences. The loaded rifle in her hands represented her final moment of freedom before arrest and prosecution. The loud bang that shattered our dining room silence wasn't gunfire, but rather FBI tactical agents executing their entry plan with precision and overwhelming force. Multiple agents burst simultaneously through front and back doors, shouting commands for Madison to drop her weapon while moving quickly to secure the scene and protect Dad and me from potential violence. Madison's rifle clattered to the floor as she raised her hands in surrender, her face reflecting complete defeat and recognition that her gambling addiction had finally destroyed everything she'd tried desperately to save. Handcuffs clicked around Madison's wrists as Detective Torres read her constitutional rights, formally arresting her for federal charges, including embezzlement, document forgery, weapons violations, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Additional evidence discovered in her purse included contact information for illegal gambling operations, threatening messages from loan sharks, and falsified documents she'd planned to use for completing fraudulent property sales. 6 months after Madison's arrest, our family sat together in Dr. Patricia Wells's therapy office, participating in sessions designed to rebuild trust and communication patterns that gambling addiction and criminal activities had severely damaged. The room's comfortable furniture and calming artwork created an environment where painful emotions could be expressed safely while working toward understanding and eventual forgiveness. Madison attended these sessions from minimum security federal facility, where she was serving her sentence while participating in comprehensive gambling addiction treatment programs. Dad's speech therapy had progressed remarkably well, allowing him to express complex thoughts and emotions with increasing clarity and confidence. The shock of discovering Madison's criminal activities had initially seemed to worsen his stroke symptoms, but learning the complete truth about our family situation actually helped him process his feelings and begin psychological healing. His voice remained slightly affected by stroke damage, but his determination to participate actively in family recovery demonstrated the strength that had built our restaurant business from nothing. I blame myself for not seeing the warning signs, Dad said during one particularly emotional session, tears flowing as he struggled to understand how Madison's gambling addiction had developed without his awareness. A father should protect his children from dangerous situations, and I failed to recognize that Madison was suffering from problems that required professional help. Dr. Wells helped Dad understand that gambling addiction often develops secretly, with affected individuals becoming extremely skilled at concealing their activities from family members who might intervene or offer assistance. Madison's accounting background had provided sophisticated knowledge for hiding financial irregularities, and her access to business operations had created opportunities for theft that wouldn't exist in most family situations. Recognizing addiction symptoms requires specific education that most parents don't possess. Madison's participation in family therapy sessions represented genuine progress toward accepting responsibility for her criminal activities and gambling addiction. Her letters of apology demonstrated sincere remorse rather than manipulation, acknowledging the pain she'd caused our family while committing to recovery programs that addressed underlying psychological issues. The minimum security facility provided excellent addiction treatment resources, and Madison was working systematically through programs designed to prevent relapse after release. I understand now that gambling became my solution to every problem, even though it created bigger problems every time. Madison wrote in one letter read during therapy. When I felt lonely, I gambled for excitement. When I felt guilty about stealing money, I gambled hoping to win enough to pay everything back. The addiction convinced me that the next bet would fix everything, but really it just made everything worse. The restaurant reopened 3 months after Madison's arrest, stronger financially than it had been in years, thanks to recovered funds and elimination of theft activities. Employee morale improved dramatically once uncertainty about business stability disappeared, and our regular customers expressed overwhelming support for our family during this difficult period. Community loyalty demonstrated the positive relationships Dad had built over 25 years of honest business practices and neighborhood involvement. I assumed full management responsibilities while completing my MBA through online coursework, bringing fresh marketing strategies and modern business practices to operations that had remained traditional for decades. New vendor relationships reduced food costs while improving quality updated point-of-sale systems, streamlined ordering and inventory management, and social media marketing attracted younger customers who appreciated authentic Mexican cuisine. Revenue grew 25% during my first 6 months of management. Madison's return to supervised involvement with restaurant operations remained months away, contingent on successful completion of addiction treatment programs and demonstration of sustained recovery from gambling behaviors. Federal parole conditions would restrict her access to financial responsibilities while allowing her to participate in food preparation and customer service activities that didn't involve handling money. Family therapy would continue throughout her transition back to civilian life. The legal resolution of Madison's criminal activities included restitution payments that would recover most of the stolen money over time. Asset forfeiture procedures recovered funds from Madison's gambling accounts, and cooperation with federal prosecutors resulted in reduced sentences that emphasized rehabilitation rather than purely punitive measures. Her assistance in investigating money laundering operations led to arrests of loan sharks, who had threatened our family, improving safety for other victims of illegal gambling enterprises. Jake Martinez resumed bookkeeping responsibilities for restaurant finances, implementing oversight procedures that would prevent future theft, while maintaining the family atmosphere Dad valued in business operations. Monthly financial reviews involved multiple people checking cash flows and vendor payments, creating accountability systems that protected everyone from temptation, while preserving trust between family members and employees. Property values had actually increased during the months when Madison planned fraudulent sales, meaning our family's financial position was stronger than before her criminal activities were discovered. Dad's house remained our family home. The restaurant building continued generating rental income from successful operations, and elimination of gambling-related theft allowed accumulation of savings for business expansion and retirement security. The most meaningful aspect of our family's recovery was Dad's renewed sense of purpose and confidence in his role as family patriarch. Understanding that Madison's problems resulted from addiction rather than family failures helped him process guilt feelings while focusing energy on positive activities that supported everyone's healing. His wisdom and experience became crucial resources for navigating complex decisions about punishment, forgiveness, and rebuilding relationships. Our story demonstrates that families can survive even the most devastating betrayals when members commit to honest communication, professional help, and patient work toward understanding and forgiveness. Madison's gambling addiction had created enormous pain and financial damage, but early intervention prevented complete destruction of our family relationships and business legacy. Treatment programs offered hope for sustainable recovery, and legal consequences provided accountability that supported rather than replaced family healing processes. The life lesson that emerged from our experience emphasizes the importance of recognizing addiction, warning signs, seeking professional help when family problems exceed normal conflict resolution abilities, and maintaining hope that people can change when provided with appropriate treatment and support. Gambling addiction is a serious medical condition that requires specialized intervention, but recovery is possible when affected individuals commit to honest participation in proven treatment programs. Have you or someone you know struggled with addiction issues that affected family relationships or financial security? Share your thoughts in the comments about how families can support recovery while protecting themselves from destructive behaviors. Please like this video if our story resonated with your experiences. Subscribe for more content about overcoming family challenges. And share this with others who might benefit from understanding how professional help and legal intervention can save families from addiction-related destruction. Thank you for listening to our journey toward healing. And remember that seeking help represents courage rather than failure when addiction threatens everything you love. May you find the strength to protect your family while offering hope for those who struggle with behaviors they feel powerless to control.